Hi everyone, my name is Carla Wright, and this is my internship experience. To start, here's the agenda for today's presentation. Before I begin, I'd like to give some context. Instead of doing one full-time internship, I did two with two separate companies over the course of 3 to 7 months, the first being Sapphire Risk Advisory Group, and the second, HBO Max Technology. In this presentation, I'm going to cover a series of topics for both of these jobs. So to start, here's some information about me. I'm from El Paso, Texas, and when I graduated high school, I moved to East Texas to a different school to study forensic science. Eventually, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do with my life, so I dropped out of college. I took some time to figure my life out and what I actually wanted to do, and that led me to Dallas, Texas, and to UNT. In 2019, I graduated with my Bachelor of Arts in English Literature, and I also graduated with a technical writing certification, and that led me to the magical world of TechComm. So let's start with Sapphire. Sapphire Risk Advisory Group is your premier cannabis security firm. Sapphire's services include things like cannabis security consulting, application writing services, security floor plan designs and secure facility buildouts, standard operating procedures, and risk assessments. The industries that Sapphire Risk Advisory Group serves are cannabis and marijuana, hemp CBD, and other high-risk businesses or industries such as pawn, jewelry, and retail. So how did I get hired at Sapphire? Back in September of 2020, I was looking for a technical writing position, and that is the terminology that I used when I was searching. I used variations of the phrase technical writer, technical communicator, tech writer, and so forth. I applied through Handshake, which is UNT's kind of career finding website. I found this position for a technical writer at Sapphire Risk Advisory Group. It seemed that I was qualified, so I submitted a resume and a cover letter that I may have spent way too much time on. Eventually, I got an interview, and we conducted that through Zoom, since this was right in the middle of the pandemic. And then finally, in October of 2020, I was hired, and I am still there today. So what kind of stuff do I write at Sapphire? The first type of projects that I work on are security plans. We write these for cultivation facilities and for medical and recreational dispensaries. I've also written SOPs, and some examples of subjects that I've covered are cash management, transportation security, and record keeping and inventory control. And the third thing that I do at Sapphire is research, a lot of research on state and municipal laws, ordinances, and regulations related to cannabis. So the types of tools that I regularly use at Sapphire include Gmail, Zoom, and most recently, Slack for communication. For project management, we use Asana and Dropbox. And for writing, I have used Excel and Google Sheets, but the number one tool that I use for writing is definitely Microsoft Word. So here's my first example of something that I've written for Sapphire. This is the table of contents for a cash SOP. An SOP stands for Standard Operating Procedures, and they are detailed step-by-step instructions for how to complete something. When I'm writing SOPs, usually I will research to find out what kinds of topics I'm supposed to include for that subject matter. If there are any templates that I can use that I can start off with and then adapt to what I'm writing, I'll go ahead and do that since SOPs are usually very standard, and by using a template, that can help you make sure to adhere to that format. In this next slide, you can see a small sample from that cash SOP. When I'm actually writing these instructions, I try to make sure that I'm using the active voice, that I'm structuring sentences using a noun-verb format. I try to make it as clear as possible so that whoever is reading this doesn't have any doubts or questions. When I've finished writing an SOP, or when I think I've finished writing an SOP, I will send it off to my supervisor for him to give me feedback on. If I need to make any kind of changes, if I need to take something out, to add something in, to edit something, I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll resend that newly updated draft to my supervisor again, and rinse and repeat until finally we have something that we are satisfied with. So the next example I have is a small section from a security plan. Security plans are usually much longer documents. They range between 25 to 40 pages or so, and they're a kind of almost strange mixture between procedure and policy related to a variety of security-related topics for a physical premises. Although the writing style is not precisely the same, it does align pretty closely with grant writing. Just like when I am writing an SOP, first I'll start off by doing research. I'll check to see what kinds of topics, what kinds of subject matter I need to include in the security plan. In this case, single sourcing is extremely useful. So usually I'll create my own framework by basing it off of previous security plans that Sapphire has written, and sometimes there are whole sections that I can take and that I can adapt for the current applicant and use it in the security plan that I'm creating. Once I have finished the security plan, I'll send it off to my supervisor for him to give feedback, and we'll usually create between 1 to 4 drafts or so. until we are satisfied. So in this next slide, I just wanted to show you all what a full table of contents for one of these example security plans might look like. As you can see, we cover a lot of topics, but the main ones might be things like the premises subscription, the prevention of product diversion, theft, and loss, operational security, including an access control plan, perimeter security, transportation techniques and security procedures because cannabis can be delivered, and employee training, employee-specific policies, and a general security overview that includes some more administrative details. So what have been my biggest challenges at Sapphire so far? First, when I was starting out, it took me a long time to absorb all of this new information. I didn't know anything about retail procedures, I knew nothing about security, and I knew even less about the cannabis industry, or the work that it takes to start a cannabis business. And I had also never had to interpret or research codes, regulations, and laws before, and so it took me a while as well to learn how to read through these laws and learn what was relevant and what was not. Something that was also a challenge for me was getting up to speed on the writing style. I had never written a security plan before, and so it also took me a while to learn the best way to structure them, the best way to write sentences and paragraphs, the best way to, or I should say the proper way to cite codes and regulations and laws. Even now, months later, I am still learning, and I still sometimes struggle with these things. And so what have I learned from my time at Sapphire so far? First, in terms of technical information, I've learned how to use a few new tools. I learned how to use Asana and Dropbox. I learned a lot of industry knowledge, since, now I know a little bit more than less than nothing about the cannabis industry. And I've also learned new writing styles. This is the first time where I've actually written SOPs, and this is definitely the first time that I've ever written something like security plans. In terms of non-technical information, I've learned that I need to ask questions. I need to always ask several questions, since there's always more that can be clarified and there's always ways that I can improve. I've also learned that I need to be proactive and do my own research. One of the ways that I adapted to these new writing styles was by doing my best to research similar examples or similar types of writing, or if Sapphire had any training materials or research materials, or maybe even just previous projects that I could look at. I would spend some of my time reading through them so that I could learn. And I've also learned that single sourcing is an incredibly useful technique in the technical writing world. So let's move on from Sapphire to HBO Max. HBO Max has the greatest TV and iconic movies. HBO Max is a video-on-demand streaming service that is part of the larger Warner Media franchise. Warner Media owns other popular brands that you might know, like TNT, Adult Swim, CNN, Cartoon Network, and more. HBO Max Technology is the part of HBO Max that makes the magic happen. They are an organization of engineers, technical program managers, and designers who build and run the HBO Max platform. So how did I get hired at HBO Max Technology? Back in November of 2020, I was looking for a technical writing position, and that is also the terminology that I used when I was searching. Again, I used variations of the phrase tech writer, technical writing, and so on. I applied through Indeed, and I found this position for a virtual technical writing internship. I seemed to be qualified, so I submitted a resume, a cover letter, and eventually I also submitted a series of writing exercises. I scored a panel interview with the documentation team, and we conducted that through WebEx, which is an application very similar to Zoom. And then in December of 2020, I was hired. This internship at HBO Max Technology lasted from January to April of 2021. So what I actually do at HBO Max Technology. Some of the projects that I've worked on have been instructions, like how-tos for tools, tutorials, and onboarding procedures. I've done some very light software documentation, working on proprietary dev tools and platforms, and also other miscellaneous things like cleaning up the internal wiki and maintaining documentation. And really what it came down to was that basically anything that needed documentation, the documentation team wrote. They wore many hats. So the kinds of tools that I usually used at HBO Max Technology includes Slack, WebEx, and Outlook for communication. For project management, we also used Asana, we mostly used Jira, and we sometimes used Miro boards. And for writing, I used Word docs when I was creating instructions or things that would eventually be put on the wiki. I sometimes used Google Sheets, and on occasion I also used GitHub. But what I mostly used was Confluence, which is the software or platform where the internal HBO Max Technology wiki was held. So for my first work example, here's a how-to document that I wrote for a Slack shortcut feature called OCal. For these sets of instructions, first I researched how to use this feature by testing it myself via Slack. I took screenshots, I recorded things, and I created instructions for how to use this feature both on the desktop and the mobile application. Once I had finished writing these instructions, I sent it to the documentation team member who assigned me this project to review it. She asked me to make a few changes, and I did. And then once we were ready, we converted this Word document into a wiki page. On this next slide, you can see a glimpse of what that wiki page actually looks like. So this particular how-to was turned into a wiki page as well as a blog post. For the actual blog post, we considered who our audience was and decided that we didn't need to include all of the information I had written up for the how-to all at once. Instead, we were only going to reveal some of that information, and then later on we would convert the rest of the instructions into a possible additional blog post. For my next example, here's a project I worked on to help overhaul an onboarding course. Now, this onboarding course named Hurley 201 was a course developed for newly hired developers to learn how to use the proprietary dev platform called Hurley. Each module in this course usually consisted of 3 wiki pages. The first page would be an overview. The second page would consist of a video that had all of the actual information for that module, and then a third you have completed this course page. The goal of this project was to convert these videos into text-based modules or text-based pages that had supporting graphics, so that it would be hopefully a better user experience for the newly hired developers. By turning it into a text-based course, these new devs would have a resource that they could continuously go back to use as reference. If they learned at a faster pace, they could click through faster, and if they learned slower, they could go as slow as they needed to, whereas the original video format sometimes made those things a little bit more difficult. This slide shows the page tree for the Hurley 201 courses, and this particular screenshot shows what the video pages actually look like. In this case, this particular module was about 40 minutes long. This next slide shows a little bit of what that converted text looks like, as well as showing what a Confluence page in editing mode looks like. Before any of this overhauled information could be published, it needed to be reviewed extensively by the SMEs who initially contributed to the course material. Since the course was originally created in around 2019, several things had changed. The process of getting it reviewed and updated took several weeks. So what have been my biggest challenges at HBO Max Technology? The first is talking to SMEs, asking SMEs for information, and just interacting with SMEs in general. I realized throughout the course of this internship that my social skills desperately need work. This leads me to the second challenge, which was realizing that being a technical communicator actually means that your daily activities are 80% interacting with other people and 20% writing. The third challenge I faced was managing my time well and learning how to prioritize work. At HBO Max Technology, there was always about 100 things going on, and they were all important in different ways. So I had to learn how to manage my time very well and learn how to prioritize what to do in the limited amount of time I've had. So what did I learn at HBO Max Technology? In terms of technical information, I learned how to use several new tools such as Confluence, Jira, and Miro. I learned industry knowledge about video on-demand streaming services, how they work, what they do. I also learned what it's like to be in a more stereotypically corporate office environment, and I also learned some very beginner computer science and software stuff through the Hurley onboarding project. In terms of non-technical information, I learned that I, once again, need to not be afraid to ask questions. If I had been too afraid to ask questions, I wouldn't have been able to do anything at HBO Max Technology because I didn't know how to use Confluence, Jira, Miro, or basically any of the other tools that the documentation team usually uses. I learned that I need to have more confidence in myself. And once again, I need to be proactive and do my own research. I had to dedicate time to learning how to use these tools so that I could be successful. So let's loop back to UNT. How did UNT prepare me? It was really difficult for me to just choose 1 or 2 courses that I think stood out, because throughout my master's degree, I feel that every course has taught me something that I found useful and that I was able to apply. From TECM 5170, the concept of framing information as a cost-benefit analysis is extremely helpful, whether that be in documentation or in just social interactions with SMEs, for example. Oftentimes, SMEs don't really have a huge stake in the documentation that you're creating, and so if you're able to frame your request in such a way where the benefit to them is apparent and the cost is low, that's a great thing. From TECM 5280, The principles of good design are extremely important. Once again, it doesn't matter what you're creating. Something needs to read well and look good, because something that looks bad usually doesn't read very well either. From TCM 5191, single sourcing is an extremely useful technique. It's always a good idea to write things in a way where they are able to stand on their own, even if maybe they are related to other important information. From TCM 5290, this course was a course on instructional design, or on the concepts of good teaching practices for online learning, and this was especially useful for the HBO Dev onboarding project because that project was about creating a better user experience for learners. And in TCM 5740, the principles of good user experience always apply. All of these useful concepts combined help make up what a good user experience is. And a good technical communicator should always be interested in making sure that their audience had a good user experience reading their documentation. So if I could wave a magic wand and go back in time and change something, what would I change? The first thing is that I would procrastinate less and I would manage my time better. This is a flaw that I have been continuously working on for seemingly my entire life, but once I finally did these internships and now that I have actively participated in the real world, I really have come to realize that you should never wait to do tomorrow what you can do today. I would try to be more confident from the outside. Being shy is not useful. Being afraid to ask questions, being afraid to put yourself out there, it's not useful, and it's more beneficial to have some faith in yourself. I would make an effort to reach out to the other team members, both at Sapphire and at HBO. Every person I've come into contact with has been a competent, friendly, intelligent person, and all of them have been resources that if I had reached out more, maybe I could have learned even more than I already have. And finally, always make sure to double, triple check everything. There is nothing more embarrassing and unprofessional than having minor grammar errors or silly mistakes in your published works. So what are the key takeaways you should remember from this video? First is that TechComm is a diverse field with many opportunities and many specializations. In this presentation, I showed you a glimpse into two almost totally different kinds of documentation of technical writing, and yet they both are still part of that wider umbrella of technical communication. The second is that UNT's TechComm program is awesome, but real-life experience is invaluable. Throughout this internship, I realized that my social skills are frankly subpar, and yet I didn't know that when I was only taking classes, because it's not a skill that you can learn very well in just a classroom setting. But when I finally reached the real world, quote-unquote, I had plenty of opportunities and plenty of experience and practice to try and improve this. And the final key takeaway that you should remember is that you can do it. That is the most important thing, I think, for any prospective student, for any current student, or for anybody else watching this video. It is that you can do it. Sometimes you may fail, sometimes you may make mistakes, sometimes things may be awkward, or maybe you underperform or not reach the goals you set for yourself, but that is okay. What is important is that you need to continue to believe in yourself, and you need to continue to believe that you can do it, and that from these experiences that are maybe not so great, you can learn and you can improve so that one day you can succeed, you don't make those mistakes, and so that you are happy and satisfied with the quality of your performance. And so finally, I just want to say thanks for watching. I hope that this video was useful to you, and if you ever have any questions, comments, or if you just want to talk about some cool TechComm stuff, feel free to contact me at wright70@gmail.com. I hope you have a wonderful day.